All right. So now is the best time to kickstart our next panel, which is the startup panel. Before that, I'd like to thank Nick, Pete, David, and Rajiv. I think the buyer's perspective in this broader ecosystem is always very important. And I thought you guys did a really good job of encapsulating what is it that you look for from a buyer's perspective. Before I kick into the next panel, I was talking to Dharmesh earlier, and he said something really funny backstage. And this is mainly for David from Nordstrom. He said that Nordstrom probably has really good machine learning and AI. And I was like, why is that? And he said every time he walks into the store, the sales associate that greets him takes him straight to the clearance section. So that is AI right there.
You still have a job, Abhi.
Thanks. So to kick things off, our next panel, features founders and CEOs of companies that are in the AI space, and we wanted to make sure that the group of CEOs and founders we have range from early stage companies to growth and later stage companies, but also have a good sample set of horizontal AI companies versus vertical AI companies. And so hopefully through our group here, you'll get a good sense of both perspectives. So with that context, I want to welcome to the stage our esteemed panelists. We have Ali Ghodsi, CEO of Databricks. We have John Su, CEO of Pilot.ai. We have George Mathew from Kespry, and Prasanna Ganesan from Machinify. So thank you everybody for coming in. And before we get started with the questions, could each of you take 30 seconds to introduce yourself and tell us more, or maybe give us one line about what you do and what the company does? Start with you, Ali.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so Databricks is a company that was started 4.5 years ago by 6 co-founders at UC Berkeley. And the main thing I think we're known for is Apache Spark, which is really a framework for combining big data and AI. We really think the secret sauce behind AI is big data. You can't do just one without the other. So that really summarizes it. And the business model is a SaaS business model. So it's like Amazon Web Services kind of. You go, you buy subscription, and you either pay by the hour or you buy bigger contracts. But we're a cloud service company. We don't really do professional services and support and those kind of things, or at least not at massive scale.
So I'm John. I'm the CEO of Pilot. What we work on deep learning-based computer vision, but in particular trying to run deep learning-based computer vision on embedded platforms, and in particular on commodity embedded platforms. So we want to take your existing hardware infrastructure, whether that's security cameras or GoPros or drones, and run deep learning-based computer vision on them.
Hey everyone, I'm George Mathew. I'm CEO of Kespry. Kespry is in the industrial drone space. We build an end-to-end hardware software platform, including manufacturing our own drones here in Menlo Park. We enable the data capture, the sensors that come off the drone to have an analytical pipeline and a set of industrial applications that currently serve the mining aggregate space, the insurance sector, the construction sector, and with yesterday's $33 million announcement going into the energy space.
Hi, I'm Prasanna Ganesan, founder and CEO of Machinify. We help companies turn data into dollars, specifically by enabling them to build AI-driven products and processes. Our focus is really on taking the cycle time for injecting AI into a product from a matter of months to a matter of days, because like an earlier speaker was talking about, AI, making money from AI is often a game of throwing darts, and you need to be able to throw as many darts as possible, as fast as possible. And so we've built an end-to-end system, and we work with companies in multiple verticals in healthcare, in financial services, in IoT, to help them move faster and inject AI into their products.
Great. Well, thank you. So to start off, we spent the first half of our session here talking about AI. Is it a buzzword or is it actually happening? And we're also talking about some of the trends that are really leading for us to talk about AI more and more. Part of it is the availability and the access to compute power from the cloud providers. And secondly, the ability to archive and store all this data. So that is something that we all know and recognize as leading indicators to why AI is starting to happen right now. But in your opinion, in your words, why do you think now is a good time, or whenever you started your company, why do you think that was a good time to go start a company in the AI landscape? You can feel free to go in any order.
Okay, so from my perspective, where we're working with large enterprises sitting on large amounts of data, I would say the catalyst generally has been their ability to bring data to play the game. I think what you saw 10 years ago was much more of an investment in the infrastructure needed to just collect the data. Now that we've got a confluence of enough data, which people have a rough idea of what it actually contains, what their files actually have, people are starting to look at what are the higher order things I can do with the data. How do I actually make money with it? My experience so far has been that we're still very much in the first inning, if barely getting started. We're still doing a lot of discovery of the playbook of how do you actually turn data into money, right? Like, I think that's, the answers tend to be very different across different verticals, and we're still figuring that out. We're still in the early stages of figuring that out. But what we see is the discovery of a few essential patterns for turning data into dollars that have been unearthed. And so, we're starting the process of mining those patterns to actually make money.
Yeah, so when we started our business in 2013, we actually didn't have a lot of applied AI use cases associated with it. In fact, it was taking a number of 2D high-resolution images and converting that into three-dimensional models using straight geometric math. Basically, we have something called the photogrammetry pipeline that converts everything from 2D to 3D models. It was actually an interesting starting point for us because what it ended up creating was the first generation of what we think of now as digital twins in a lot of these industrial markets. Where the AI ML workloads really start to play out is particularly these last 2 years. We started to notice that we can now take image processing capabilities that were mostly out of the box and sort of customize it for our own needs to start to go after some really high value use cases. So we literally went from $0 in the insurance sector to several million in the insurance space alone just this past year, because we started to do algorithmic methods where we can now identify what the level and extent of hail damages, wind damages, anomaly detections are, particularly on roofs when you want to do better claims assessment. The underpinnings of it were very much based on things that were off the shelf. We took Google TensorFlow, we got to modify a bunch of sort of training models that we built mostly through convolutional neural networks and long short-term memory models that we started to modify for the ability to now distinguish and identify the level and extent of damage on a roof. It turned out that that specific use case was a mind-blowingly perfect use case in the insurance sector, particularly this year with the heavy extent of the superstorm. So, like when Harvey and Irma kind of went through both Texas and Florida, we were probably the best suited drone company to now go in and be able to do catastrophic response in a level where the insurance adjusters could now cover 3 homes in an hour versus 3 homes in a day. So it's a 10x productivity improvement in what happened. And farmers, the CEO of Farmers got up on stage and talked about, and CNBC in fact, and talked about how Kespry is being used for exactly that purpose. So I find an opportunity right now, just because the algorithms are there, the compute infrastructure is there. Ali and I worked together for years in my previous company and his current company, where you can actually now do very strong applied use cases for monetization. And I'm just glad we're right in the middle of that growth opportunity in the space.
Yeah, I think all those points are valid. Definitely, computer infrastructure is there, the data is there, et cetera, algorithms are there. But for us, one of the biggest things is the expectation of the buyers and the customers into what the AI can actually do is now set at the right spot, right? Like before, you would go into a customer and they'd expect Skynet or something like that, whereas now their expectations are much more refined. And because they're more refined, the use cases, they know what use cases to build around those. And so those use cases are now value creating for their customers. And so that allows them to pay us more, which creates valuable companies. So I think the expectation of the customers is really what makes it a good time right now.
Okay. So why is it a good time to start an AI startup right now? I think 3 things that are different now than, say, when we started Databricks 4 or 5 years ago. Number 1 is cloud. I think cloud is a game changer. Let's say you just want to try out the GPU model. You want to see if it runs faster, if it's a good idea for your company to adopt GPUs. You can just swipe a credit card and get 100 GPU machines right now and try it out in 1 day or 2 days or a week and evaluate that. Before, you would have to buy those machines and invest in which type of GPU machines. Do we really want to go after GPUs as an enterprise or not? So just that agility that you can iterate on modern hardware and get lots of compute, that's just a complete game changer. And it's just accelerating everything. The other thing with the cloud is that now there's lots of data sets in the cloud. One of our bigger customers is selling a data set to another one of our customers for $200 million a year. That data set, they're not shipping it in hard drives or CDs. That data set is available in the cloud. So you have to be in the cloud. That's where all the data sets will be. There will be people who sell data sets. There will be people that sell models, AI models, and so on. So that kind of has centralized and made everything much more efficient. So that's the cloud. The second thing that's different now, say, than 5 years ago is the software. Other people mentioned it as well. 5 years ago, you didn't have TensorFlow. You didn't have Spark. You didn't have any of these technologies. So all the algorithms have been there for 40 years, but they were in math papers. So you couldn't really use them. But now they're all available just off the shelf. You can download them, stitch them together, and start doing things with it. The third thing that's different, I think, now is that there's a lot more educated data scientists around the world who know how to use the software, the cloud, and all these algorithms. That was not the case when we started the company 5 years ago. I'm not going to name names, but there were a lot of use cases that were, it was very clear they won't have any return on investment. AI use cases, chief data scientists and companies they were talking to, and we were just scratching our heads. Why are they doing these projects? They're not going to bring any value to that company. That's changed. The quality has sort of been raised, and part of that is if you look at the top universities in the United States, they're doubling down on educating data scientists. It's like one of the most popular, the most popular graduate program now in CS at UC Berkeley is machine learning. So it's like all these kids are coming in, they just want to learn machine learning and AI. So you're just going to have also a quality pool of people that you can hire. So I think those are three exciting things. So we're happy to be doing AI at this time.
Got it.
I mean, one point, I think thematically what you're hearing is a strong democratization across the compute infrastructure, across storage, across even now just resources of people who actually know how to do this work in a proper way, but also just how you can now take advantage of algorithms that were largely inaccessible for a lot of people for many, many years. And now you can try things much, much faster than ever before without a whole lot of expense associated with it. So ultimately, it comes down to how you apply these use cases and the opportunities that are in front of you versus having to do a lot of science experimentation at this point.
Got it. No, I think that's that's a very good point. I think with the democratization of compute and with software frameworks, everybody now has a shot at building an AI company or at least solving a complex problem with AI. But the big question that an age-old adage that gets associated with AI always is your algorithms are only going to be as good as the data you have, and the data quality and the data size that you have is going to be a driving factor as to the quality of the actual solution that you can build. And so by that definition, the web scale companies, the FANG companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Google are sitting on a treasure trove of data. And so by that definition, they're the most equipped to go build the best AI technology. So how does a startup company combat that? What is your response as a startup entrepreneur to that kind of problem? Go ahead, Ali, I'll start.
Okay, I'll start. Okay, so actually two parts of it. One is why is it not going to be Google, Microsoft, only those companies? Because the problems they have solved so far are very niche, simple problems. They have access to this massive free data set called World Wide Web that we created for them, and they're just mining that. But if you want to solve, say, cancer detection in X-ray tumors, they don't have that data set. They don't have the doctors that even know how to detect those cancer tumors in those X-rays. So actually, most of the data is, those kind of data sets are actually sitting in the other Fortune 2000 companies. They're sitting on those troves of data. They're not going to give it to the existing vendors. They want to solve those problems, like in healthcare or in finance and so on. They don't actually have those financial, healthcare, IoT data sets. Those companies that people think of, the cloud companies that are in the AI space, they don't actually have those data sets. So that's one. The second thing is you can do what Databricks is doing, which is we're building horizontal platforms to democratize for those other companies, for the other Fortune 2000, so that they can do the kind of things Google did with their secret sauce data that Google does not have, like the X-rays that have cancer tumors in them. Right? So that's why you should do that now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Same experience from our side. Our customers outside have their own data sets, and in particular, they have data sets that are relevant to their problem set. So given that we're an edge-based computing company, a lot of the IoT customers that Ali just talked about, there's plenty of cameras, plenty of sensors everywhere. They're collecting data. They're just trying to figure out what to do with it. In particular, they're not going to give that data to Google or Facebook because that's kind of scary for them. And so they need to find other solutions, and that's where we can compete.
Yeah, so we went pretty extreme on this one. We decided that if there's a unique set of data that needs to be generated for these industrial workloads, we're going to have to generate it ourselves. And so we ended up building the machine that would go and fly and be able to collect sensor-based information, mostly imagery. We're now sensor fusing that with GPS. There's some thermal sensors that we're now introducing into the market. And so this is actually giving us a lot more real accurate information of just physical assets, which is where we're playing in the industrial world. And it turns out that once we have the reliability of that sensor data and the sensor fusion, then the analytical pipelines, the AI ML workloads, the applications that we're building become much more seamless and meaningful and monetizable than trying to rely on someone else's data.
Yeah, I mean, to echo other points, yeah, if you're a horizontal company, then certainly the value is in helping companies solve core problems for which they have unique data that they bring to bear. If you're building a vertical application, I think the goal would be to try and become a system of record for some class of data. Because at the end of the day, if you're building some kind of predictive model on top of data that's in somebody else's system of record, you're probably a feature and not a product. So at some point, you're going to get replaced by whoever owns that data. So yeah, if you're a vertical company, you do need to find a class of data that you can lay claims to.
So
Can I just say, I mean, the big picture is this is the really early days of AI. I mean, it's like when the first iPhones came out. How many applications did people come up with afterwards? 5 years, 6 years later, it's like, wow, I can't believe we didn't think of this 5, 6 years ago. This is like the early days. We've only sort of touched some of the low-hanging fruits of what AI can do. There's so many ideas out there. So people who can build tools for the people that have ideas, and also people that have ideas to actually solve entire end-to-end problems in verticals. There's just so much low-hanging fruit that is out there. It's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years. This is like very early days, in my opinion.
no, it's a fair point. I think sounds like across the panel, there's a common consensus that either you need to have a unique data acquisition strategy. So in George's case, it's drones. In John's case, it's edge computing. Or if you're not, and then you work with a customer's data where you're working with customers that own that data, and then you go solve problems for them. So maybe to open it up more specifically to you, Ali and Prasanna, since you guys are in the horizontal AI space, how do you go about talking to these customers and convincing them to open up their data sets to you? Because yes, you want to solve their problems for them, but at the same time, if you're going to a healthcare company or a financial services company, they have a lot of compliance and regulations to adhere to. So how do you overcome that problem of getting the data that you need in order to be competitive as an AI company?
Sure. So I guess there are many dimensions to that. I mean, first of all, if you go solve problems that are core to an enterprise, chances are they're building machine learning models that they want to retain as their key competitive differentiating advantage. So we can't just go provide outsourced models, or we can't sell the same model to every customer. They really need to feel ownership of it, and they need to have a way to use that as a competitive advantage, which means we need to sell them a product which essentially allows them to own that. So what we've focused on is really enabling our customers to solve problems themselves. So it is a self-service product, but which allows them to go solve problems that are core to them, which they would otherwise have a harder time solving without our technology. But at the end of the day, we're enabling product managers or analysts within that company to be able to solve problems that they otherwise couldn't have, while retaining the intellectual property of what ends up being created. Now, from the infrastructure perspective, you certainly have to align with the regulatory requirements. You need to be HIPAA compliant if you're selling into healthcare, like we are. A traditional multi-tenant SaaS system might not work in all cases. So we often have single-tenant VPC deployments and things like that. So you do have to check those boxes and design your infrastructure to align with your customers' needs. But I think the key comes down to the fact that if you're solving core problems, your customers need to feel ownership of the results, and they need to be able to control those results.
Yeah, so you asked, how do we convince the customers to sort of give us their data? I mean, I would turn it around. It's the early days of AI. It's a complete mess out there. It's a zoo of tools, software. None of it works. You have to stitch them together. Or you use Spark with TensorFlow, with scikit-learn, in the cloud, on the right machines, with this GPU, with that. Nothing works. It's a complete mess. There is no one you can hire who can do this stuff for you. Companies are struggling like crazy with this stuff. We go in and say, hey, this project that you've been struggling with for 12 months, we can do it in 1 month. We can do it in 2 weeks. We show them the tech, and they love it. I mean, they absolutely want to try it. Then there are table stakes that we have to. They're like, okay, but there are some blockers here. The security team over there wants to know, can you satisfy X, Y, Z? So we have to check those boxes. But once you have the champions inside the line of business that says, I want this stuff. This is so important to me. This is going to make this 12-month project. My career is on the line. Can you help this happen? Then the security team is under pressure. They will say, okay, are you SOC 2 compliant? Are you HIPAA compliant? Can you satisfy this and that? They'll put you through the ringer, and eventually you come out on the other side. And so if the value is there, and it's you can really make things much simpler for them, you can get through those hoops. And we work with the intelligence community. We work with data sets that are highly confidential, top secret, in fact. And you need to have clearance for it. But eventually, even the CIA has realized that the cloud is important. So I'm sure everyone will get there.
And just a quick follow-up on that, and if anybody feel free to answer this. Do you solve the data acquisition problem, or the data size problem with maybe modifying your algorithm to be maybe more unsupervised versus supervised? Then the data set dependency goes away. Is that a thing, or no? The more data you have, the better always.
We found that the more data we can acquire, particularly for some of these examples, like the more roofs we fly over, the better our algorithms get. I mean, we're heavily using supervised learning models for the purpose that we're going after these examples. But we'll take as much data as we can get, right? We're now looking for, we're not getting as much coverage as we would want. So now we're working with some of our customers who have archival data that we can now go back and in our deal structures, we're kind of modeling in, can we get access to some of the insurance archival data that can be put into our cloud infrastructure as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also about educating the customer about where that data comes from, right? So one way to shrink down the amount of data that's required is to get better data, right? And so what I mean by that is if we go to a doorbell company and we're like, hey, we need 10,000 hours of footage, and they give us 10,000 hours from one camera, that doesn't help, right? But if we get 10,000 individual frames from 10,000 cameras, then we don't need 10,000 hours, right? And that makes a big difference. So.
Got it. The next question is more for George and John. Since you guys are focused on a specific vertical, could you talk about why your vertical specifically is an ideal vertical to be disrupted by AI? And for all the benefit of the entrepreneurs here, what are some of the commercial challenges that you've faced as you're building the business, and what are some of the opportunities, and how do you kind of overcome those challenges to take advantage of the opportunity?
Yeah, so in our spaces, so mining aggregates, in the insurance space, and the construction space, it turns out these are some of the most occupationally hazardous, work environments that you can possibly get into. Like people fall off of stockpiles, sprain their legs. The roofing is the third most occupationally hazardous job in the country. So it turns out that the less the people are on roofs, but the less the people are climbing stockpiles of material, yet you can get very valuable insights accomplished in a more autonomous way, the better off everyone is. And I think even the industrial worker themselves would agree to that. And so we found that we can actually go into a lot of these heavier industries and really be positively disruptive in the sense that we have customers come up to us and they're literally in tears because they're like, I had to retire from my job because I had hip replacement surgery, and now I have my work life extended by a decade because we're flying a Kespry drone that's collecting the data in an accurate way and helping me continue to do my job for the next decade. So the factor of safety, in at least the use cases that we tend to go after, is such a differential between drone versus non-drone that it just completely clears the deck as far as whether this is going to be hugely advantageous for both the company and the worker. And so we try to then build a number of really detailed use cases from that point on, right? Like we don't just go into the mining aggregate space and just say, hey, we're going to generically fly a drone. We look at how we can create a very algorithmically accurate inventory management solution in that world. When we look at the roofing sector and the insurance sector, it's all about just can that claims management process 10x and ideally 100x the status quo. So when we find those use cases, the monetization becomes a lot easier because we literally have some of the biggest leaders, even up to the CEO level of many of the organizations that we're serving now, literally engage in pretty direct conversation about how we can be helpful.
John?
Yeah, for us, our focus is IoT and edge-based computing. We basically looked at all the different possible edge-based compute devices. That's IP cameras to action cameras to AR, VR headsets. We literally listed down like 50 different things. And then we had a couple criteria. One of the main ones was how many devices are actually already deployed. So IP cameras bubbles up to the top because you have doorbell cameras, you have drop cams, you have security cameras all over the place. And so the good thing about that is we can go in and we don't have to sell them new hardware or new infrastructure. We're just like, hey, let's just try it on your existing security system in your hotel or something like that. And they can immediately A/B test and figure out what the value prop is to them. More importantly, on top of that, most of them already have, like the IP camera market, they already had some low-level analytics on top, right? Whether that was using motion sensing or using some old school traditional CV methods. And there were a lot of problems that they faced with that. It cost them a lot of money because the accuracy level is really low. And so a lot of people are calling into customer service. So they're paying a lot of customer service. They're paying a lot of truck rolls to go replace cameras. And so that allows us to, we don't have to convince them about what the value prop is. We're just like, okay, we saved you X amount of dollars. Pay us that. Right? So, yeah.
Got it. So, this is more for Ali and Prasanna, given you guys are more horizontally focused. Based on what George and John said, it's very clear if you have a vertical-focused AI solution, you can go to a buyer and say, hey, you have an existing software method. It's broken and slow. There's a budget for it, but I'll come and give you something better. So the discussion is a lot smoother, for lack of a better word. But as a horizontal company, as you talk to customers, how do you go and achieve business and AI's impact on business? So there are some buyers here in the audience, and so if you were to be given 60 seconds in front of a buyer, what would be your pitch as to how this horizontal technology can impact them? Start with you, Ali.
Okay. Well, we actually verticalize as well inside Databricks, so I should say that. So we have like healthcare vertical, we have finance vertical. So we actually do focus, but we do actually have a horizontal platform as well. Our main pitch is the product, the AI projects that you have that are taking you 6 months, 3 months, 12 months. We can accelerate them many orders of magnitude and make them much, much faster and efficient because we have integrated turnkey technology that's much simpler to use. So it just makes your data scientist's life so much easier to get to the results. How come it works in a horizontal manner? Well, because it's all about the data. In fact, even the coolest deep learning stuff that you all have been reading about is running stochastic gradient descent at its core, which was invented in the 70s. So there's nothing new algorithmically. So then why has it taken 40 years to get good results? Turns out it's really, really hard to get petabytes of data, scale it on modern hardware, GPUs and whatnot, and just make it work. That data problem has been the hard part. And we solved that data problem. And that data problem kind of looks not that different if you go across verticals. It's how do you go from lots of devices that spew out lots of data to a mathematical matrix that you can do machine learning on. That problem is really hard and messy. And that's where most companies are struggling. That's what we want to simplify for them. So that's common across all of these verticals.
Okay. So one thing Ali, you and I've certainly done this once before. When I was president of Alteryx, we talked quite a bit about what the shift change was, right? And then as you guys introduced Spark into the market, we introduced Alteryx from a prep blending standpoint into the market. Introducing an in-memory engine for data processing, just like Spark, and ended up becoming that new engine with an in-memory underpinning was a fundamental shift change. I just don't know how many horizontal platforms can do that. I mean, obviously Databricks can do it because of how much you guys have been purveyors of Spark. But I almost see that there's very few real horizontal winners, and there could be many multiple vertical winners in the market.
You're right. I actually agree with that. There will be many more vertical winners.
Knowing Ali's going to be winning here, so.
No. I agree actually that there are going to be many more vertical winners. But I would just say there's the horizontal stuff that exists, including the stuff we've built, including Spark. Spark can just be so much better. There's room for you guys to disrupt, right? So there's we're improving it. We're going to come out with a new version that's going to be much better than anything we did before from base what we've learned. These are the early days, and the technology is essentially crap. In 10, 20 years, it's going to be so much better. All this stuff will be kind of like Excel. we're not there yet. So I think there's room for innovation in the horizontal play, but you're right. It's kind of a winner-takes-it-all market. It's not going to be thousands of horizontal platforms that win. It's going to be a few.
Prasanna, did you want to add something?
Sure. To go to the question of how do you sell a horizontal product, yes, you do need repeatable use cases. You're selling use cases, not the horizontal platform. I think it's really hard to ask people to write a check for abstract technology, right? So when it comes to use cases, we go find where there is pain and we go specialize around those use cases. Should do the ROI analysis and show why using Machinify helps things go faster. And to us, what it usually comes down to, the pattern is typically the same across industries. When it takes a really, really long time to solve problems, problems don't get solved, and the class of problems you choose to attack is a lot smaller than the class of problems you wish you could attack. If you have to spend $1 million and have a 50% chance of having something to show at the end of it, you aren't attacking that many problems. So if you can have game-changing technology that reduces that cost of experimentation to $1,000 instead of $1 million or $10,000, you're going to, it's the tip of the iceberg that's going to expand, right? So you're going to attack 10 times more problems. And when you attack 10 times more problems, you need you have a lot more needs that you didn't think of when you were solving one problem every 6 months. So that's really what we end up doing. We find use cases that make sense, which we think companies ought to be attacking, but perhaps aren't attacking as aggressively, and then go help them solve those use cases.
Yeah, very interesting. Just to close on that subject, and Ali, I know I see you smiling already, but this is one of your favorite topics. But we've seen, I tend to agree, and we have within Battery the thesis that there are going to be one or two standardized horizontal platforms, with a lot of the future innovation coming on the vertical side. But we've seen prior horizontal efforts kind of fail in the last 5 or 10 years, and you've been in the data space for a long time along with George. What, in your opinion, did those startups get wrong that some of our entrepreneurs here who are maybe looking to build a horizontal technology can learn from?
Well, I mean, so far the platforms, the problem with them has been that they've been way too hard to use, and they've been built. I mean, honestly, a lot of this tech came out of Google, most of it, right? Like Hadoop came out of Google, essentially, right? They wrote the paper, and then later Yahoo tried to build what was already in Google. And the problem Google has always had, and the Googlers know it themselves. I don't know if there are any ex-Googlers here or Google people here, but they know it. Google tech is only good for Google PhDs. It's not for mere mortals. And everyone else is copying that. So you're building this stuff for the MIT PhDs, but most Fortune 2000 companies don't have MIT PhDs. And they certainly don't have thousands of them. They don't have 30,000 of them like Google has. Okay? So I think that has been the problem. So Hadoop was way too complicated to use. Then we built Spark. Then you can look now, there's like this thing called TensorFlow. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's insane how hard it is to use it, and for no good reason. It's just complicated, right? If you want to do distributed TensorFlow now, you have to actually pick exactly which partition goes to which machine. Okay, I want this piece to go to that machine over there, this to go over there. It's way too complicated. So what's happening in the innovation, I think, is people are just making it simpler and simpler and simpler. The other thing I would say is maybe hardware technology. Keep an eye on where hardware is going. So Spark did that with memory. So we were seeing that the DRAM price was going down. That's what we said, wow, you can probably store all of this stuff in memory, right? So keep an eye on FPGAs. Keep an eye on RDMA for networking. Just keep an eye on where hardware is going. And now also hardware is actually adapting also to this stuff, like with TPUs and stuff like that. So if you can latch on to trends that are happening in the hardware space, you can also get ahead of the existing platforms, which are not built for the hardware that will exist in 5 years. So.
Makes sense. Oh, very good answer. So just to switch topics a little bit, one of my favorite questions that I always kind of struggle with when I speak to AI startups is, AI talent and engineering talent and data science talent is very hard to find. It's a rarefied breed. And the ones that are available get poached by the big 4 companies. I've heard crazy offers where Google goes and hires a fresh PhD from Stanford for more than $500,000 a year, if not more. And so as a startup with limited resources and VC funding, how do you compete with that? How do you continue to hire the best people and draw them to your company? Prasanna, you want to kick it off?
Well, as a 7-person company, we've hired the best. But I think more seriously, I feel like this stuff isn't that hard for a systems engineer to learn. And in fact, the whole premise of Machinify was that I was really frustrated at how painful it was for me to solve problems end to end. So I wanted to automate that stuff that a data scientist or a data engineer is doing every single day. So the whole premise of Machinify is if you can't hire data scientists, buy Machinify. So yes, I think hiring data scientists is hard, but on the other hand, I don't think I think you can learn a lot of this stuff really fast if you have a good systems background. And I think 99% of the problem is engineering.
Yep. George, you've done this at 2 companies, Alteryx and now here, so you have twice the knowledge. So
yes, Alteryx, I didn't play the Silicon Valley engineering game because we ended up building all of our engineering resources in Broomfield and Boulder, Colorado, and that worked out incredibly well because basically between 2011 and 2015, 16, we had an ability to scale engineering out in a meaningful way without having to compete. So Kespry is, of course, based in Menlo Park. I do have an advantage in the fact that I have a flying robot, and so it turns out a lot of people who have deep interest in multidisciplinary skills like IMUs and control systems and autonomy and analytical pipelines, they converge to Kespry. We went from 40 people to 100 people this past year just because of the multidisciplinary nature of the things that we focus on. So I personally have not run into a hiring challenge for ourselves, even in Silicon Valley, just because of what we happen to be doing in the market.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to your point. AI is actually pretty early in its stage. Most of the quote-unquote people who are AI or data scientists weren't doing this 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Half those people at Google who have PhDs working on Google Brain didn't get their PhDs in AI. They got it in fields like systems, or they got it in fields like architecture or numerical analysis, computational math. So there's plenty of those folks around who are interested in working on these problems. So those are who we go after.
I'll do 3 things. So this used to be I used to run engineering, so this used to be my job. We call it asymmetric hiring. So very common that you're up against Google and they're paying some kid, 25-year-old, $1 million essentially a year. So you have to win over them. It's 3 things we say over and over. It's number 1 is impact. If Jeff Dean, the guy who came up with TensorFlow, was joining Google today, we'd have to get behind the line 30,000 other smart people. Go stand in the back. He wouldn't have had any of the impact he's had today. So if you join a startup, you can't become the Jeff Dean of this company. You can have that kind of impact. So that's huge. Second, learning. If you join the Googles, Facebooks of the world, they won't really put you on the really interesting problems. So there's a lot. You have to work your way up slowly. So you're not actually going to learn here. We put you on the hottest problems, right? And then third, when it comes to compensation, it's equity, equity, equity. It's like that story about the Facebook, the guy who painted the wall at Facebook white, and then, I don't know, it was worth 20 million or something later. So it's like that. So your equity here could be worth 50 million. I mean, you're the, sky's the limit. So you have to pitch them on that equity. If you're just comparing cash, you're going to lose big time.
Yeah. Too bad I didn't take painting class in college. So I think we're almost out of time. I do want to give the audience a chance to ask maybe a couple of questions. So any questions for our panelists?
Raise your hand. Oh, Dharmesh.
If there's no questions from the audience, I was going to ask a quick question here as well, just to get a perspective. How ready is the market for AI? When you talk to customers, do you feel like you have to evangelize it quite a bit, explain to them why they need it, or is there enough awareness where they say, hey, there's this giant sucking sound, I need it yesterday? Like, where on that spectrum is the market? And secondly, who's kind of the ideal audience for you to sell into? Whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, so we did not run into a big set of conversations on, is this something where we can take advantage of AI or not? I think it came into a discussion of what is this challenge that you're running into? Turns out that, detection of damage on rooftops is a very hard problem. And when we introduced a method that we can go solve that challenge, then they asked us how we did it, right? And then we unpack that for them. There was a little bit of disbelief about it. Then there was a comparison of like what we did versus the manual methods. And there was an iteration that we went through with some of the major carriers in North America. But at the certain point, it became very real to many of the decision makers, particularly the heads of claims management for the work that we were doing, particularly after this last round of superstorms, that there's no way that this work can scale, right, manually. And that put us over the edge because we were just able to show it's 90% accurate, humans are 80% accurate, it's 10x faster, and people aren't falling off roofs.
So you talked about the democratization of AI, which I think is clearly underway in a big way. Do you worry that once it becomes widely accessible and no longer requires those MIT PhDs, it's going to get misapplied and we're going to see a backlash of bad AI outcomes?
I'm sure there's actually bad AI outcomes already today.
Worse ones?
Yeah, no, I think we think about this a lot, right? Because even when we go into the markets that we're going into, bad can mean a bunch of things. Like bad can mean it's a bad decision you made, or bad can mean there's been something that you've corrupted some portion of society, right? And all of those things are relevant. So for us, we try to hire well on this topic. We try to make sure that people have a very strong analytical mindset, but also has very strong human context and relatability of how this stuff is getting applied.
I was more worried about the customers of you guys. You're making it more accessible to customers who are not maybe going to be as educated about how to apply it or use it or analyze it, and they'll misapply it, get bad outcomes, and then say, hey, this AI stuff just doesn't work.
That was actually part of my last answer. We have had a lot of hand-holding. It's amazing because the second largest team that's grown inside of Kespry after engineering is customer success. And there's a reason for that, because we literally are hand-holding our customers, not on whether things are functioning for what they should out of the box, but to interpret results, to understand these outcomes, to know what's different between what the status quo was.
That's already the case today. Today, almost most AI projects are failing, taking too long. Yeah. They're not showing the ROI they're supposed to. That's why I'm saying you guys should get in there, or you should buy tech from us because it's really good. But that's already the case. It's like you don't see the results because it's so hard. And our job is to simplify that so that people can see those ROIs. That's a different question from, can you do evil things with the tech? That's like a whole different ethical, moral question you should ask George.
I get the question all the
drones
time.
So and stuff, what can you do with drones?
After that, I do think data-driven product management is a skill set that's different from building traditional products.
That's absolutely right.
So there is a set of heuristics that you learn on how to do it. And we find that the most leveraged time we spend with our customers is really training them on how to do data-driven product management.
Anything else?
One last question over there.
Oh, there's a question.
I see a lot of consumerization or democratization of AI in the enterprise or the industrial sector. If I look at the consumer sector, AI is still locked in a box in smart devices. Do you see a trend where AI as a service becomes a lot more democratized in consumer industries?
I think so. I think it just depends on. It's taken a little while in the consumer sector because consumers don't want to pay that much for it, whereas on the commercial side, people are willing to pay multiple dollars per month or something like that. But it will catch up on the consumer side. The value prop to the consumer is there, right? It's just who's going to pay for it. It's probably not going to be the consumer shelling out money for it. It's going to be like a Facebook or a Google finding other ways to monetize that data while still providing them a useful service, right? So it'll just take some time, but it's getting there.
Super high-level AI platforms for people who don't know programming and data science haven't been super successful, I would say. Yeah. And maybe it's too hard to make it successful. But we're not in that business. We build stuff for people who know a little bit of programming or they're data scientists. So TBD, I think.
I can't comment much about what else is remaining in the consumer sector to apply AI to in a proper way. I do know the world has enough snapshots, so I want to go after more meaningful work being accomplished in the industrial space, and that's where we've been putting our attention.
Cool. Anything else? Anybody else? Go ahead.
So, Prasanna, when you walk into an enterprise customer with a solution stack, they have not, because of the pessimism around investing in an infrastructure without proving, do you recommend that, okay, invest in infrastructure in such and such way for your solution stack to work, or your emphasis is that, okay, whatever infrastructure you have, like hardware infrastructure or whatnot, will make the best utilization of that with our solution stack? So what's your approach when you...
Yeah, so let me go fast. I can do this pretty fast. We're in the cloud, so no, we don't support your hardware. We don't support your stack. You know, and the reason we did that is by design, because if you go after the cloud companies, if you look at the cross and the chasm, we're already, the people that are in the cloud are the early adopters, or maybe the early majority and so on. It's not the late majority, it's not the laggards by design, so we're talking to the right guys already, right?
So
We're not going to try to convince the laggards who have really esoteric, weird architectures, try to convince them that you need to buy new machines so that Spark can work on it. So we don't go after them.
The data is already on the cloud.
Yeah, we do that on purpose that way, so that it make our lives easier.
Yeah, I mean, 100% of our customers are in the cloud too. So.
By the way, all the 5 top AI companies, like the Microsofts, the Facebooks, you name it, whatever they're called, are cloud companies.
Yeah, but do you think that that leaves a gap for the big set of companies which don't want to move their data to cloud?
Everybody's looking at moving their data to the cloud. I mean, not maybe all of it, and not just completely shutting down, and but everybody's looking at moving into the cloud. Even the most cost, as I said, even the intelligence sector and also the finance sector, which is heavily regulated, are all in. I don't know if you saw Goldman Sachs now on reInvent last week, AWS. So it's going to happen all over the place. That's my
Yeah, for these kind of workloads, because the hardware infrastructure is changing over time, the compute that you'd want to apply in terms of both storage, compute, and just what your even GPUs are and how you kind of scale that up and scale it down. I think it is a dumb idea to try to build this stuff internally without having full cloud resources, no matter what company you are. I mean, look, if the CIA and most of the intelligence community can run on AWS, I'm pretty sure the rest of the world can as well. We happen to do a lot of spot price-based compute on AWS. Like we expand elastically and contract elastically based on what the spot prices are and take advantage of when the best prices are available for our pipeline processing.
By the way, you should have been skeptical a bunch of years ago when there was only AWS and they had monopoly. Now there's 3 big vendors with infinite pockets, right? Google, Microsoft, and AWS. So it should be a no-brainer these days.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. Can we hear a round of applause for our panelists?